at my daughter's graduation celebration, surrounded by our closest friends and family in one of Atlanta's most elegant restaurants. My husband of 28 years stood up during what should have been a beautiful toast. His voice cut through the laughter and champagne bubbles like a knife through silk. "I've decided to start a new life," he announced, his eyes not quite meeting mine. "Without you, Regina." His girlfriend, younger, prettier, whiter, was sitting just 3 tables away, nervously smoothing her dress, while our friends suddenly found their wine glasses fascinating. The room went so quiet you could hear the ice melting in the water pitchers. Everyone was waiting for me to scream, to cry, to throw something. Instead, I smiled, the kind of smile that comes from knowing something no one else in that room knew. "Congratulations on your honesty, Marquis," I said softly, my voice steady as stone. Then I reached into my purse and pulled out a cream-colored envelope. I placed it beside his plate with the same care I'd once used arranging flowers for our anniversary dinners. When he opened it later that evening, his screams could probably be heard all the way to Buckhead. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you why that envelope existed in the first place, and why I walked out of that restaurant with my head high while my marriage burned to ashes behind me. I want to pause here, because I'm so grateful you found this story. If you're watching this, please do me a favor and hit that like button, subscribe to my channel, and drop a comment telling me where you're hearing my story of revenge from. I want to know how far the truth travels, how many other people out there understand what it means to reclaim your power. Are you listening from New York? Lagos? London? Let me know. Your presence here means everything. Now, let me take you back to that moment, the moment everything I'd built came crashing down in the most public way imaginable. It was May 14th, a Saturday afternoon. The Georgia sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Canoe, one of those restaurants where white tablecloths cost more than some people's car payments. We'd reserved the private dining room for 30 guests, family, close friends, Marquis' business associates, people we'd known for decades. This was supposed to be Tamara's day. My baby girl, my only child, had just graduated summa cum laude from Spelman College with a degree in economics. I was 51 years old. I'd spent the last 28 years being Mrs. Marquis Campbell, the supportive wife, the steady hand, the woman who worked 60-hour weeks as a senior financial analyst so my husband could chase his dreams. Those dreams changed every few years. The consulting firm that never materialized, the tech startup that ate through our savings, the real estate ventures that always seemed to need just a little more capital. But that day was supposed to be about Tamara. I'd worn my favorite dress, a soft lavender that Tamara said made me look regal. My sister Danielle sat beside me, squeezing my hand every time Marquis' speech went on too long. He was talking about family values and building legacies, while I watched our daughter's face, trying to memorize her smile before everything shattered. That's when Marquis stood up. He'd been drinking, not enough to slur, but enough to feel invincible. He raised his glass higher, and his voice changed. Lost its warmth. "I have an announcement," he said, and something in his tone made the whole room tense. "I've been doing a lot of soul-searching lately." My stomach dropped. "And I've realized that life is too short to stay in situations that no longer serve you." He still wasn't looking at me. He was looking at her, Rebecca Morrison, 29 years old, blonde, sitting with her hands folded in her lap like she was praying. She worked in his office. I'd met her at the Christmas party. She'd called me ma'am. "So I've decided," Marquis continued, his voice getting louder, more confident, "to start a new chapter. A new life. Without Regina." The silence that followed was suffocating. Someone's fork clattered against a plate. Tamara's face drained of color. My sister's grip on my hand went so tight, I thought she'd break bones. Every eye in that room was on me, waiting. Would I cry? Scream? Beg? Would I give them the drama they'd whisper about for years? I thought about all the ways I could respond. But then I remembered what was in my purse, that envelope I'd prepared 3 weeks ago, after I discovered everything. After the bank statements and the deleted texts and the receipt from the jewelry store for a necklace I'd never seen. After I'd put all the pieces together with the same precision I used analyzing corporate portfolios. So I smiled. Not a bitter smile. A genuine one. Congratulations on your honesty, Marquis, I said clearly so everyone could hear. My voice didn't shake. Not even once. I reached into my purse, pulled out the envelope, and placed it beside his champagne glass. Then I stood, smoothed my dress, and walked to my daughter. I kissed her cheek and whispered, "This day is still about you, baby. Don't let him take that." And then I walked out. I didn't run. I didn't stumble. I walked through that restaurant with my head high, my heels clicking against the hardwood floor, while 30 people sat frozen in mortified silence. Behind me, I heard Rebecca's small voice. "Marquis, what was that?" And my husband's response, cocky and cruel. "She'll get over it. She always does." But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd already gotten over it. I'd gotten over him months ago. That envelope? It was just the beginning. The Georgia heat hit me like a wall the moment I stepped outside Canoe. It was that thick, humid kind of warmth that makes your skin feel like it's wrapped in wet cotton. But God, I could breathe again. For the first time in hours, maybe months, my lungs felt like they were actually filling with air. I walked to my car slowly, deliberately. My hands weren't shaking yet. That would come later, in the privacy of my sister's guest room, when the adrenaline finally wore off and the reality settled in like lead in my bones. But right then, in that moment, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. I felt free. The valet brought my car around, a modest Honda Accord, 8 years old, still running perfectly because I'd maintained it meticulously. Marquis had always wanted me to upgrade to something more appropriate for our status. A Mercedes, maybe. A BMW. Something that announced success. But I'd always refused, told him we needed to be practical, to save money. The truth was simpler than that. I'd known, even then, that his version of success was built on credit cards and borrowed time. I sat in the driver's seat and didn't start the engine right away. Instead, I stared at the steering wheel, at my hands gripping it, hands that still wore my wedding ring because I hadn't wanted to tip him off. 51 years old. 28 years of marriage. More than half my adult life spent building a home with a man who'd just torn it down in front of everyone we knew. The thing is, I saw it coming. Maybe not the public humiliation at our daughter's graduation. Even I didn't think he'd sink that low. But the affair? The lies? The slow erosion of respect? I'd felt it for months, like watching a building develop cracks in its foundation. You know it's going to fall. You just don't know when. I thought about the woman I used to be. 23 years old, fresh out of Georgia State with my finance degree, ready to change the world. I'd had dreams back then, big ones. I was going to start my own consultancy, help women navigate the financial systems that seemed designed to keep them dependent. I was going to write books, give speeches, build something that mattered. Then I met Marquis Campbell at a networking event. He was handsome, charming, full of ideas and ambition. He talked about building empires, creating generational wealth, leaving a legacy. And I believed him. God help me, I believed every word. We got married within a year. I was pregnant with Tamara 6 months after that. And somewhere in the chaos of diapers and daycare and Marquis' first business venture, a consulting firm that needed just a little startup capital, my dreams got filed away like old tax returns. I told myself it was temporary. Once his business took off, once we were stable, once Tamara was older, then I'd pursue my consultancy. Then I'd start building my own legacy. But Marquis' businesses never quite took off. There was always another pivot, another sure thing, another reason we needed to dip into savings. The consulting firm became a tech startup. The tech startup became a real estate venture. The real estate venture became something else I couldn't even remember now. Each one ate money like a fire eats oxygen, and each time, I was the one working longer hours, picking up the slack, keeping the lights on while he reinvented himself. 28 years of that. 28 years of putting my dreams on hold while I funded his. I worked my way up to senior financial analyst at Crawford & Associates, one of Atlanta's most respected firms. I managed portfolios worth millions. CEOs trusted me with their retirement funds. But at home, Marquis treated my income like it was our safety net, something to catch him when his ideas failed, something he could count on without ever having to acknowledge what it cost me. The promotions I turned down because he needed me home for his networking dinners. The conferences I skipped because someone had to pick up Tamara from school. The opportunities that slipped through my fingers like water because I was too busy holding everything together. And you want to know the worst part? I let it happen. I made those choices. I told myself it was what good wives did, what good mothers did. I convinced myself that supporting my husband's dreams was the same as having my own. But sitting in that parking lot, with the sound of the restaurant's jazz music drifting through the spring air, I finally admitted the truth. The right time was never going to come. Marquis was never going to wake up one day and say, "Regina, now it's your turn." He was always going to need just a little more money, more time, more of me until there was nothing left to give. Except I'd stopped giving months ago. When I first found those bank statements, the ones showing transfers to accounts I didn't recognize, part of me wanted to ignore them, to pretend I hadn't seen the pattern. But my training wouldn't let me. I'd spent my entire career following money trails, identifying discrepancies, uncovering hidden transactions. I couldn't turn that skill off just because it was my own life. So I'd followed the trail. And what I found wasn't just infidelity. It was betrayal on a scale I hadn't imagined. The hotel rooms, the jewelry, the weekend trips he'd claimed were business conferences, the beach property he'd been eyeing with Rebecca while telling me we needed to tighten our budget. But here's what he didn't know. While he was planning his exit, I was planning mine. I'd started gathering evidence, documentation, proof. I'd found the old prenuptial agreement he'd insisted on before we got married, the one with the fidelity clause he'd probably forgotten existed. I'd consulted with lawyers, quietly, during my lunch breaks. I'd moved money, carefully, legally, into accounts he couldn't touch. I'd built my case the same way I built financial portfolios, methodically, thoroughly, with no room for error. And I'd made a decision. This time, finally, after 28 years, I was going to put myself first. I started the engine. The air conditioning kicked in, and I adjusted the vents, pointing them at my face. My reflection stared back at me from the rear-view mirror. Same face I'd had that morning, but somehow different. Harder. Clearer. I'd spent nearly 3 decades waiting for the right time to chase my dreams. Waiting for permission that was never going to come. Waiting for someone else to decide I was worth investing in. That envelope sitting beside Marquis's champagne glass? It wasn't just divorce papers. It was my declaration of independence. My notice that the waiting was over. The right time wasn't coming. So, I was making it myself. I put the car in drive and headed toward my sister's house, where I'd been staying for the past 2 weeks. Where my real life, the one I was building without him, was already beginning. Behind me, in that restaurant, Marquis was probably still celebrating his honesty, his bravery, his new beginning. He had no idea his world was about to collapse. But he would soon enough. It started with $47. That's all it took to unravel 28 years of marriage. A single transaction for $47 at a restaurant I'd never heard of, charged to our joint credit card on a Tuesday afternoon in February when Marquis had supposedly been in a client meeting across town. I almost missed it. I was reviewing our monthly statements the way I always did, sitting at the kitchen table with my reading glasses perched on my nose and a cup of chamomile tea going cold beside me. It was muscle memory by then. Decades of tracking every dollar, making sure we stayed on budget while Marquis chased his ever-shifting dreams. But $47 at Bistro Nico at 2:30 on a Tuesday? That didn't fit. I'm a financial analyst. Pattern recognition is what I do for a living. I spot anomalies in spreadsheets the way some people spot typos in text messages. And this was an anomaly. A small one, barely worth noticing, except that it bothered me like a pebble in my shoe. So I looked deeper. The month before, there'd been a charge at the same restaurant. $63 that time. Then I scrolled back further and found another one in December. And November. Always on weekday afternoons. Always when Marquis claimed to be working. Always just under $100. Small enough not to trigger my attention during a quick review, but adding up to something substantial over time. My tea went completely cold while I sat there, my pulse quickening, pulling up 6 months of statements on my laptop. I told myself I was being paranoid. Marquis probably had legitimate business lunches. Maybe he'd mentioned Bistro Nico before and I'd forgotten. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. But then I found the hotel charge. The Ritz-Carlton, Buckhead. One night, midweek, charged in January. $297 plus tax. We lived 20 minutes from Buckhead. Why would he need a hotel room? I pulled up our shared calendar on my phone, hands trembling now. January 15th. The date on the hotel receipt. According to the calendar, Marquis had been at an overnight conference in Savannah that night. I even remembered him calling me from the hotel, or at least from a hotel. He'd complained about the conference food, asked about tomorrow's chemistry exam, told me he loved me before hanging up. Except he'd been lying. He'd been at the Ritz-Carlton in our own city, close enough to drive home in 20 minutes, choosing instead to spend the night somewhere else. With someone else. The chamomile tea wasn't helping anymore. I switched to wine. Over the next 3 weeks, I became someone I didn't recognize. During the day, I went to work like always, analyzing portfolios, meeting with clients, maintaining the professional composure I was known for. But at night, after Marquis fell asleep, I sat in her home office with the door locked and followed the money. Because money always tells the truth. People lie. The credit card statements don't. I found the jewelry store purchases first. Tiffany & Company, 3 separate transactions between November and February. $1,500. $2,200. $3,100. I'd never received any Tiffany jewelry. Not for Christmas, not for our anniversary, not for my birthday in January. Then I found the weekend trip to Charleston. A bed and breakfast 2 nights, Valentine's Day weekend. The same weekend Marquis had told me he needed to visit a potential investor. The same weekend he'd asked me to stay home because Tamara had that college preparation seminar. The wine wasn't helping either. Nothing was helping except the methodical work of documenting everything, building the case file like I was preparing for an audit. Screenshots. Printed statements. A timeline color-coded by transaction type. But it was the real estate searches that finally broke through my denial. I found them on our shared computer in mid-March, buried in the browser history he'd forgotten to clear. Zillow listings for beachfront condos in Tybee Island. Mortgage calculators showing monthly payments we definitely couldn't afford. Saved searches for oceanfront property under $500K. He'd been looking at retirement homes. Our retirement homes, I'd thought at first. Until I noticed the search parameters. 2 bedrooms, not 3. 2 bathrooms, not the 2.5 we'd always talked about. Properties designed for a couple starting fresh, not a family with a grown daughter who'd visit. He was planning a future without me. He'd been planning it for months. I sat at that computer for over an hour, clicking through the properties he'd bookmarked, reading the descriptions he'd saved. Perfect for newlyweds. Your coastal escape awaits. Start your next chapter in paradise. That's when I started looking for her. The woman who'd receive the Tiffany jewelry, who'd share the hotel rooms, who'd walk on those beaches in Tybee Island while I grew old alone in the house I'd helped pay for. It took me 2 days to find her name. Rebecca Morrison. She'd tagged Marquis in a Facebook post from 6 months ago, some office party photo where his hand was resting just a little too familiarly on her shoulder. 29 years old according to her profile. Blonde. Pretty in that effortless way that made me suddenly conscious of every line on my own face. She worked in his office as a marketing coordinator. I'd met her. I'd shaken her hand at the Christmas party. She'd complimented my dress and called me ma'am, while my husband fantasized about a beachfront condo with 2 bedrooms. The rage came then hot and blinding. Not the screaming kind, I was too controlled for that. But the cold, calculating kind that makes you dangerous. I wanted to confront him immediately, to throw the evidence in his face and watch him scramble for excuses. But I didn't. Because that's when I remembered the prenup. Marquis had insisted on it before we got married. He'd presented it 3 weeks before the wedding, claiming his father's lawyer had recommended it, just as a precaution. I'd been hurt at the time, It felt like he didn't trust me, like he was planning for our failure before we'd even started. But I was young and in love and didn't want to fight, so I'd signed it. 28 years later, I'd almost forgotten it existed. I found it in the filing cabinet where we kept all our important documents, buried under mortgage papers and birth certificates. The pages were yellowed, the staple rusty, but the text was still perfectly legible. I read through it carefully, my analyst's brain cataloging every clause, every provision. Standard stuff, mostly division of assets, debt responsibility, spousal support limitations. But then, on page 7, I found it. Section 12. The Fidelity Clause. In the event of proven infidelity by either party, the unfaithful spouse forfeits their claim to marital assets acquired during the marriage and is responsible for all legal fees associated with divorce proceedings. Marquis had insisted on this clause. He'd explained it to me back then, saying it would protect us both and ensure we always honored our commitment. He'd made it sound romantic, like a promise we were making to each other. Now, it was going to destroy him. I made copies of everything that night. The prenup, the credit card statements, the hotel receipts, the real estate searches, screenshots of Rebecca's Facebook profile. I organized it all in a folder labeled Tax Documents 2019, something Marquis would never think to open, and I made 3 backup copies. One on a USB drive in my desk at work, one in my sister Danielle's safe, one uploaded to a secure cloud service. Then I did something I'd never imagined I'd do. I called a divorce attorney. Not just any attorney. Patricia Chun, one of the best in Atlanta, someone whose reputation for winning complicated cases was legendary. We met during my lunch break at a coffee shop far from my office. I laid out everything I'd found, watching her eyes sharpen as she reviewed my documentation. "This is excellent work," Patricia said, her voice impressed. "Most people come to me with suspicions. You're coming with evidence." "What happens now?" I asked her. She smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who knew exactly how to win. Now we make sure he regrets every lie. That was 8 weeks before Tamara's graduation. 8 weeks before Marquis would stand up in that restaurant and announce his new life. 8 weeks to build the envelope that would change everything. I was at Danielle's house, sitting on her back porch with a glass of wine I hadn't touched, when I heard his car screech into the driveway. The tires made that angry sound against the gravel, the kind of noise that announces fury before the person even opens their mouth. My sister looked at me with concern. "You want me to stay?" she asked quietly. "No need," I told her, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "He can't hurt me anymore." The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. I heard him storming through the house, calling my name like he had the right to summon me. Like I was still his wife in anything but paperwork. "Regina." His voice carried through the house, ragged and desperate. "Regina, where are you?" I took my time standing up. Smoothed my dress, the same lavender one from the restaurant, though I'd changed into flats now. Let him wait a few seconds longer. Let him feel what it was like to need something from me and not get it immediately. When I walked into the living room, he was standing in the middle of the floor holding that cream-colored envelope like it was contaminated. His face was flushed red, veins visible at his temples. The confident man who'd announced his new life a few hours ago had disappeared, replaced by someone who looked like he'd swallowed poison. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, waving the papers at me. I sat down on Danielle's sofa, crossed my legs, and met his eyes without flinching. "You can read, can't you? They're divorce papers." You can't. He was sputtering now, struggling to form complete sentences. "You don't get to decide this, Regina." "Actually, I do," I said calmly. "That's how divorce works. One person decides they're done and they file. I filed 3 days ago. You're being served officially on Monday, but I thought you deserved advance notice. Consider it a courtesy." His hands were shaking as he flipped through the pages. I watched him scan the documents, saw the exact moment he reached the financial disclosure section. His face went from red to pale so fast, I thought he might pass out. "You went through our accounts?" His voice was hoarse now, less angry, more afraid. You had no right to. I had every right. I interrupted, my tone still pleasant, almost conversational. They're joint accounts, Marquis. My name is on every single one. And as a licensed financial analyst, I'm actually obligated to notice irregularities. $47 lunches at Bistro Nico? Hotel rooms 20 minutes from her house? Nearly $6,000 in jewelry I never received. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Opened it again. I can explain all that. I'm sure you can. You've always been good with explanations. I leaned back into the sofa, getting comfortable. But here's the thing. I don't actually need to hear them. The evidence speaks clearly enough. Regina, listen to me. He moved toward me, and I held up one hand. He froze mid-step like I'd cast a spell. No, Marquis. You listen to me, for once. My voice was still quiet, but there was steel in it now. I've already filed for divorce. The prenup remains valid for the duration of our marriage, which means until our divorce is finalized, you're still bound by its terms. I watched his face carefully as understanding dawned. He straightened slightly, and I saw him grasp for confidence, like a drowning man reaching for driftwood. The prenup? He actually laughed, though it sounded forced. Regina, that thing expired years ago. It was only valid for the first 10 years of marriage. You're bluffing right now. I smiled. I'd been waiting for this moment, had actually hoped he'd make this exact mistake. Section 4, paragraph 2. I said quietly. The prenup remains in effect for the duration of the marriage unless modified by written agreement signed by both parties. We never signed a modification, Marquis. I checked very carefully. The color drained from his face completely now. He looked down at the papers again, flipping frantically to find the section, and I knew the moment he found it because his whole body seemed to deflate. But that means, he whispered. Section 12. I continued, my voice still maddeningly calm. The fidelity clause. In the event of proven infidelity, the unfaithful spouse forfeits their claim to marital assets acquired during marriage. You remember that clause, don't you? You insisted on it. Said it would keep us honest. You can't prove anything, he said, but his voice had lost its conviction. He sounded like a child trying to deny eating cookies while chocolate covered his face. I stood up slowly and walked to the dining room table where I'd left my phone. Picked it up and pulled up the audio file I'd been saving for exactly this moment. Actually, I can. I pressed play. His voice filled the room, tinny through the phone's speaker but perfectly clear. After the graduation, once we've gotten through the performance, I'll tell her. Maybe she'll finally understand I've moved on. Then Rebecca's voice, younger, uncertain. Are you sure this is the right time? At tomorrow's celebration. It's the perfect time, his voice continued. Everyone will be there. She won't make a scene in public. She's too proud. And afterwards, she'll have no choice but to accept it. Clean break, Becca. Then we can start our real life. I let it play for another 30 seconds, watching Marquis' face cycle through shock, denial, and finally something that looked like genuine fear. When I stopped the recording, the silence in the room felt thick enough to cut. Where did you? He couldn't finish the question. Your office, I said simply. You left your phone unlocked during our last anniversary dinner. I installed a small app. Completely legal, by the way, since the phone is on our family plan. Every call, every conversation with Rebecca for the past 2 months. All recorded. All admissible in court. He sank into a chair like his legs wouldn't hold him anymore. His hands covered his face, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. This will ruin me, he whispered through his fingers. Yes, I agreed. It probably will. The prenup is very clear. You get nothing, Marquis. The house, the retirement accounts, the investments, all of it stays with me. You'll be responsible for your own legal fees. And given that everyone we know just watched you humiliate me at our daughter's graduation, I doubt you'll find much sympathy anywhere. He looked up at me then, and I saw something I'd never seen in his face before. Not anger, not even fear. Defeat. Complete and total defeat. Why now? He asked hoarsely. Why tell me like this? Why couldn't we just talk privately? I thought about that question. Thought about 28 years of conversations where my voice got quieter and quieter until I wasn't sure I had one anymore. Thought about all the times I'd swallowed my dreams so he could chase his. Thought about being called ma'am by the woman who'd been sleeping with my husband while I paid the mortgage. Because you took my choice away, I said finally. You decided to end our marriage in the most public, humiliating way possible. You chose the time, the place, the audience. So, I'm just returning the favor. You don't get to control this narrative anymore. You don't get to be the hero of your own story, while I'm the obstacle you overcame. I picked up my wine glass, the one I still hadn't drunk from, and walked back toward the porch where Danielle was undoubtedly listening to every word. You'll receive the official service on Monday, I said over my shoulder. I suggest you find yourself a good attorney. You're going to need one. Regina, please. His voice cracked on my name. I paused at the doorway and looked back at him one last time. Sitting there in my sister's living room, holding papers that would end the life he'd been planning, looking smaller and older than I'd ever seen him. The answer is no, I said quietly. Whatever you're about to ask for, whatever you think we can negotiate, the answer is no. You made your choice at that restaurant. Now you get to live with it. I walked out onto the porch and closed the door behind me, leaving him alone with the ruins of his new beginning. From inside, I heard a sound that might have been crying. I didn't go back to check. Living at Danielle's house felt like stepping back in time to a version of myself I'd almost forgotten existed. Her home near Clark Atlanta University was smaller than the house I'd shared with Marquis, a cozy craftsman bungalow with creaky hardwood floors and bookshelves in every room, but it felt more like home than anywhere I'd been in years. You can stay as long as you need, Danielle said that first night, setting fresh towels on the guest bed. Actually, scratch that. You can stay forever. I like having you here. My sister had always been different for me. Where I'd learned to be controlled and measured, Danielle was bold and unapologetic. She taught African American literature at Clark Atlanta, wore her natural hair in silver locks that reached her waist, and had never married because, as she put it, I've yet to meet a man interesting enough to reorganize my entire life around. I should have listened to you, I said, sitting on the edge of the bed while she arranged fresh flowers, purple irises, on the dresser. About what specifically? She raised an eyebrow. Because I've been telling you Marquis was trash for about 27 years now. Despite everything, I laughed. It came out watery and broken, but it was still a laugh. You saw it from the beginning, didn't you? I asked her. Danielle sat down beside me, taking my hand in hers. I saw a man who loved the idea of you more than he loved you, who needed you to be small so he could feel big. But you loved him, Regina. I couldn't tell you that. You had to see it yourself. I wasted so much time. My voice cracked on the last word. No, baby. She squeezed my hand tighter. You raised a brilliant daughter. You built a career. You survived. That's not wasted time. That's life. And now you get to start a new chapter, a real one, not whatever fantasy Marquis was selling. I stayed in that guest room for 3 days before Tamara came to see me. I heard her car pull up Saturday morning, heard her familiar footsteps on the porch. When she walked into the house, I was sitting at Danielle's kitchen table with coffee going cold in front of me, and the moment I saw my daughter's face, I started crying. Oh, Mama. Tamara crossed the room in 3 strides and wrapped her arms around me. She was 22 years old, a college graduate, supposed to be starting her adult life. Instead, she was comforting her mother, while her family disintegrated. I'm so sorry, I whispered into her shoulder. I'm so sorry he did this on your day, baby. You deserved better. You deserved. Stop apologizing. Tamara pulled back, and I saw that her eyes were red too, but her jaw was set in that stubborn way she'd had since she was 3 years old. You didn't do anything wrong, Mama. He did. Only him. We sat at that table for 2 hours while I told her everything. Not the sanitized version, not the carefully edited story I'd planned to tell. The truth, all of it. The affair, the money, the recordings, the prenup. She deserved to know what kind of man her father had become. When I finished, Tamara was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, I need to talk to him. Sweetheart, you don't have to. Yes, Mama. I do. Her voice was firm, already walking toward the door. Because right now, I'm not sure I even know who he is anymore. Tamara went to see Marquis that afternoon. I didn't go with her. She needed to do this alone, needed to confront her father without me there to soften his landing. But she told me about it later, every painful detail. She found him at the house we'd shared, packing boxes in what used to be our bedroom. He tried to hug her when she arrived. She stepped back, arms crossed. How could you, she asked him. How could you do that to Mama? On my graduation day? According to Tamara, Marquis had attempted his usual charm offensive. Told her it was complicated, that sometimes adults grow apart, that she'd understand when she was older. All the clichés people use when they don't want to admit they're selfish. Don't patronize me, Tamara had said, her voice ice cold. I'm not a child anymore, Dad. And I know about Rebecca. I know about the hotels and the jewelry and the beach house you were planning. I know everything. That's when he changed tactics, started making excuses. The marriage had been dead for years. Your mother, and I wanted different things. Rebecca made him feel alive again. Young again. All the justifications cheaters tell themselves when they don't want to admit they simply chose their own pleasure over someone else's pain. You humiliated her, Tamara told him. In front of everyone we know. At my graduation. You couldn't even wait one more day? One more hour. Marquis had apparently tried to explain that the timing just happened that way, that emotions got the better of him, that he hadn't planned it like that. More lies, poorly told. I don't want to see you right now, Tamara had said finally. Maybe not for a long time. You need to figure out who you want to be, Dad. Because the man I'm looking at, I don't recognize him anymore. She'd left him standing there among half-packed boxes, and when she got back to Danielle's house, she'd cried in my arms for over an hour. But the Real explosion came 2 days later when Marquis showed up at Danielle's house with Rebecca in tow. I was in the kitchen helping Danielle prepare dinner when we heard the doorbell, followed immediately by aggressive knocking. Through the front window, I could see Marquis' car in the driveway, Rebecca sitting in the passenger seat, looking uncomfortable. Danielle opened the door, but didn't invite him in. What do you want, Marquis? I need to talk to Regina. He tried to look past her into the house. About her accounts. She's frozen me out of everything. The accounts Patricia told you about? I called from the kitchen. The ones the prenup says you have no claim to? He pushed past Danielle, actually pushed my sister aside, and stormed into the kitchen. Rebecca followed more hesitantly, staying near the doorway like she wanted an escape route. You can't just lock me out of my own money. Marquis' voice was loud, desperate. I have bills to pay, Regina. I have a life to live. Then you should have thought about that before you violated the fidelity clause. I kept my voice level, refused to match his volume. Every account with my name on it is now solely mine per the prenuptial agreement you insisted on. If you need money, I suggest you talk to your girlfriend. I'm sure she'll be happy to help. That's when Rebecca spoke for the first time, her voice small and uncertain. Marquis said we'd have access to the accounts. He said once the divorce was filed, we'd split everything 50-50, and we could start looking at properties. I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. She was so young. Standing there in designer jeans Marquis had probably bought her, her face a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. Rebecca, honey, I said, and I genuinely felt sorry for her in that moment. There's no 50-50. The prenup gives him nothing. Did he tell you about the prenup? Her face went white. He said, he told me you didn't have a prenup. He said everything would be divided equally. He lied to you, I said simply. The same way he lied to me for months. About the hotels, about the jewelry, about the beach house plans. None of it was real, sweetheart. He was spending my money and promising you a future he couldn't deliver. Marquis' face had gone red again. Regina, shut your mouth. Don't you dare. Danielle stepped between us, all 5'3" of her suddenly formidable. Don't you dare speak to my sister like that in my house. But Rebecca wasn't listening to any of us anymore. She was staring at Marquis like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. You said you had investment properties, she said slowly. You said you were the primary breadwinner. You said Regina was the one holding you back financially. The silence that followed was deafening. Rebecca. Marquis reached for her. Don't touch me. She stepped back, bumping into the doorframe. Oh my God. You lied about everything. About the money, about the properties, about... Her voice broke. You said your marriage was already over. You said she knew and was okay with it. You said... I was protecting you from... From what? Rebecca's voice rose now, all that practiced sweetness dissolving into anger. From knowing that you were a liar? That you were using me? That you promised me a life you couldn't actually provide? She turned to me then, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. He told me you two were separated. That you'd agreed to split everything. That you were... She couldn't finish. I know, I said softly, and I meant it. He's very convincing when he wants to be. Rebecca looked at Marquis one more time, and I saw something die in her eyes. The fantasy, the dream, whatever story he'd sold her about their future together. It all crumbled in that kitchen, leaving nothing but truth and betrayal. We're done, she told him. Don't call me. Don't come to my apartment. We're done. She walked out of the house, and we heard her car start a moment later, tires squealing as she drove away. Marquis stood there, looking between me and Danielle, like he expected one of us to fix this for him. Like he expected us to make it better. Get out, Danielle said quietly. And don't come back unless Regina invites you. Which she won't. He left without another word, shoulders slumped, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. After the door closed, I realized Tamara had been standing on the stairs the whole time, watching everything. She came down slowly and hugged me tight. I'm proud of you, Mama, she whispered. You didn't yell. You didn't break. You just told the truth. And for the first time since that restaurant, I felt like maybe I was going to be okay. The Fulton County Family Court wasn't as dramatic as the courtrooms you see on television. No soaring ceilings or imposing wooden panels, just fluorescent lights, beige walls, and rows of uncomfortable chairs where lives got dismantled in orderly, legal fashion. I sat beside Patricia Chun at the plaintiff's table, wearing a navy suit I'd bought specifically for this occasion. Professional, composed, unshakable. Everything I'd been practicing to be for the past 3 months. Across the aisle, Marquis sat with his attorney, a younger man named Brandon Hicks who'd been hired exactly 6 days before the hearing. I'd done my research on him. Fresh out of law school, mostly handled traffic violations and small claims cases. Marquis had clearly run out of money for better representation. Patricia leaned over and whispered, he's going to try to claim the prenup is unconscionable. Standard desperation play. Don't react no matter what. I nodded, my hands folded calmly in my lap, while my heart hammered against my ribs. Judge Maria Santos entered, and we all rose. She was in her 60s, known for running an efficient courtroom and having zero tolerance for nonsense. Patricia had been pleased when we'd drawn her as our judge. Please be seated, Judge Santos said, settling into her chair and opening the case file. Campbell versus Campbell, dissolution of marriage. I've reviewed the preliminary filings. This should be straightforward given the prenuptial agreement, but I see the respondent has filed a motion to invalidate said agreement. Mr. Hicks, you may proceed. Brandon Hicks stood, adjusting his tie nervously. Your Honor, my client believes the prenuptial agreement signed 28 years ago is no longer valid and should not be enforced in these proceedings. On what grounds? Judge Santos's voice was neutral, but her eyes were sharp. The agreement was signed under duress, Your Honor. Mrs. Campbell was pregnant at the time and felt pressured to sign to secure the marriage before the child's birth. Additionally, the terms are unconscionable given the length of the marriage and my client's contributions to the household. I felt Patricia's hand touch my arm gently, a reminder to stay still, stay quiet. But inside, I was burning. Pregnant and pressured? I'd been 6 months pregnant when we'd married, yes, but the prenup had been signed 3 weeks before the wedding, long before any time pressure. Judge Santos looked at me over her reading glasses. Mrs. Campbell, is it true you were pregnant when this agreement was signed? Yes, Your Honor. My voice came out steady, thank God. But I wasn't under duress. The prenup was presented 3 weeks before our wedding. My attorney at the time reviewed it with me. I signed voluntarily. And do you have documentation of this separate legal counsel? Patricia stood smoothly. Yes, Your Honor. We've submitted the affidavit from Attorney James Woodson, who represented Mrs. Campbell in 1997. He confirmed she was advised independently and signed of her own free will. Tab 3 in your binder. Judge Santos flipped to the document, reading silently. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the wall clock ticking. Mr. Hicks, the judge said finally, the presence of independent legal counsel substantially undermines your duress argument. What else do you have? Brandon Hicks shuffled his papers, clearly flustered. The unconscionability claim, Your Honor. My client has been the primary emotional and domestic support for the family throughout the marriage, while Mrs. Campbell focused on her career. To leave him with virtually nothing after 28 years is grossly unfair. Let's talk about that. Judge Santos's tone had shifted, becoming colder. Your client signed an agreement that included a fidelity clause, correct? Yes, but... And Mrs. Chun has provided substantial evidence of infidelity. The judge was already flipping through the documentation. Hotel receipts, financial records showing expenditures on another woman, recorded conversations. This is quite thorough, Mrs. Chun. Patricia inclined her head. My client is a senior financial analyst, Your Honor. Documentation is her specialty. I can see that. Judge Santos studied a page, then looked directly at Marquis. Mr. Campbell, did you or did you not engage in an extramarital affair with a Ms. Rebecca Morrison? Marquis stood awkwardly. Your Honor, the marriage was already over emotionally. We were just... That's not what I asked. Did you engage in an extramarital affair while still legally married to Mrs. Campbell? Yes or no? The pause felt like it lasted forever. Finally, Marquis said quietly, Yes, Your Honor. Then the fidelity clause applies. Judge Santos closed the binder with a decisive thump. Mr. Hicks, unless you have case law showing that a voluntarily signed prenuptial agreement with a clear fidelity clause can be invalidated simply because the consequences are unpleasant for your client, I'm inclined to uphold this agreement. Brandon Hicks looked desperately at his notes. Your Honor, we'd ask the court to consider that Mrs. Campbell also benefited financially from the marriage. Her career advanced while my client provided domestic support. Mrs. Campbell was the primary breadwinner for the majority of this marriage, was she not? Judge Santos cut him off. According to the financial disclosures, she earned substantially more than your client in 22 of the 28 years they were married. And during the years your client earned more, those earnings came from ventures funded largely by Mrs. Campbell's income. Is that accurate, Mrs. Chun? Patricia stood again. That's correct, Your Honor. We've provided tax returns for the entire duration of the marriage. Mrs. Campbell's W-2 income consistently exceeded Mr. Campbell's 1099 income from his various business ventures. In fact, several of those ventures resulted in losses that were absorbed by Mrs. Campbell's salary. Judge Santos turned to me. Mrs. Campbell, do you have anything you'd like to add? I stood slowly, feeling the weight of this moment. Just that I honored every provision of that prenuptial agreement for 28 years, Your Honor. I never asked to dissolve it, never tried to circumvent it. I simply expect my former husband to honor it as well, now that he's violated its central clause. The judge nodded, and I sat back down. Here's my ruling, Judge Santos said, her tone brooking no argument. The prenuptial agreement is valid and enforceable. The fidelity clause was clear. Mr. Campbell acknowledged his infidelity, and therefore the consequences outlined in Section 12 will be applied. She paused, making notes on her legal pad, while my heart threatened to beat out of my chest. Mrs. Campbell is awarded the marital home, all retirement accounts in her name, and 70% of jointly held assets. Mr. Campbell will retain his personal business accounts, pending full discovery to ensure no marital funds were improperly transferred. All legal fees associated with this divorce will be paid by Mr. Campbell per the terms of the agreement he signed. Brandon Hicks stood desperately. Your Honor, my client won't have the resources to. Then your client should have considered that before violating the agreement he insisted upon. Judge Santos's voice was sharp now. I've seen too many cases where people demand prenuptial agreements to protect themselves, then cry foul when those same agreements work against them. Mr. Campbell wanted this protection in place. Now he gets to experience its full effect. She signed several documents, then looked up at both tables. This divorce is granted. I'm issuing a 60-day waiting period for the decree to become final, during which Mr. Campbell must vacate the marital home and transfer all required assets to Mrs. Campbell. Any violations will result in contempt charges. We're adjourned. The gavel came down with a single, definitive crack. It was over. Patricia squeezed my hand under the table, and I realized I was shaking, not from fear, but from relief so profound it felt like gravity had reversed. Across the aisle, Marquis sat with his head in his hands while Brandon Hicks gathered his papers with a defeated air of someone who'd known from the start this was unwinnable. I stood, smoothed my suit jacket, and walked out of that courtroom with my head high. Behind me, I heard Marquis' voice, small and broken. Regina, wait. Please.
Can we talk?
I paused at the door, looking back one time. He looked older than his 53 years, worn down by consequences he'd never imagined would apply to him. No, Marquis, I said quietly. We're done talking. The judge said everything that needed saying. Patricia held the door open for me, and I walked through it into the courthouse hallway where Danielle and Tamara were waiting. My daughter hugged me tight. How did it go? We won, I told her, and saying it out loud made it real. We won everything. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to smile, really smile, not the controlled mask I'd been wearing, but genuine joy. Justice hadn't been loud or dramatic. It had been quiet, methodical, delivered through documentation and legal precedent, and a judge who'd simply enforced the agreement Marquis himself had demanded. Sometimes the best revenge isn't fire and fury. Sometimes it's just the truth, presented clearly with receipts. The thing about Atlanta's Black professional community is that it's both vast and intimate. You can know thousands of people, but everyone who matters knows everyone else. News travels fast, and judgment travels even faster. I learned about Marquis unraveling the way I learned about most things in those weeks after the hearing, through carefully worded phone calls from people who suddenly remembered they'd always been more my friend than his. The first call came from Diane Richardson, a woman who'd sat 3 tables away at Tamara's graduation. She owned a public relations firm and had been considering hiring Marquis for a consulting contract. Regina, honey, she said, her voice dripping with sympathy that felt only half genuine. I just wanted you to know, I've decided not to work with Marquis after all. After what happened at the graduation, and then hearing about the divorce proceedings. Well, a man who can't honor his commitments at home won't honor them in business either. I thanked her politely, hung up, and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication. Just a distant acknowledgement that consequences were unfolding exactly as they should. The second call was from Marcus Webb, who'd invested in one of Marquis' previous ventures.
He was more direct.
I pulled out, he said simply. Had a contract ready to go for his new consulting thing, but I can't be associated with that kind of mess. It's too public, too messy. Bad for my brand. There were others. Phone calls, text messages, carefully casual conversations at the grocery store. Each one a small domino falling, and together they formed a pattern I could see even though I wasn't trying to watch. Marquis' new consulting business, the one he'd been building with such confidence while planning his exit from our marriage, was collapsing before it even properly launched. Not because I'd sabotaged it, not because I'd called anyone or spread rumors. Simply because people had seen what he'd done at that restaurant, and they'd drawn their own conclusions about his character. I heard about Rebecca through Tamara, who'd heard it from a mutual friend who worked in Marquis' office building. She left him, Tamara said one evening while we were having dinner at Danielle's house. Moved back to Charleston, apparently. Someone said she blocked his number. Danielle snorted into her wine glass. Smart girl. Too bad. She didn't figure it out before she helped blow up a marriage. She's 29, I said quietly, surprising myself with the sympathy I felt. He probably seemed like everything she wanted, successful, established, confident. How was she supposed to know it was all smoke and mirrors? You're too generous, Mama, Tamara said, squeezing my hand. But I guess that's why you're you and not like him. The truth was, I'd stopped thinking about Rebecca weeks ago. She'd been a symptom, not the disease. Marquis would have found someone else if not her. Someone to make him feel young, relevant, desired. All the things I apparently hadn't made him feel anymore, though I'd never stopped trying until the very end. The most detailed account of Marquis' downfall came from an unexpected source. Gerald Patterson, one of Marquis' oldest friends, who called me 6 weeks after the court hearing. Regina, I need you to know, I had no idea what he was doing, Gerald said, his voice heavy with something that sounded like shame. At the graduation, when he made that announcement, I thought I was having a stroke. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It's not your burden, Gerald, I told him. You didn't do anything wrong. I know, but I've been around him lately,
Seen how things are going.
and I thought you should know that he's paying for what he did. Not because anyone's actively punishing him, but just because he paused, searching for words. Because people remember Regina. They remember how he treated you, and they're making their decisions accordingly. Gerald told me that Marquis had been forced to move into a small apartment in East Point, that his car had been repossessed, that he'd been quietly asked to leave the business alliance he'd been so proud of joining. Nothing dramatic, no public confrontations, just doors closing, one after another, as the community voted with their feet. He was at Nikolai's roof last week, Gerald continued. Same place he used to hold court, remember? Used to buy rounds for everyone, talk about his next big deal. Now he was sitting alone at the bar, and people were deliberately avoiding him. It was like watching a ghost haunt his own past. I thought about that image. Marquis at Nikolai's roof, the rooftop restaurant where he'd celebrated his 40th birthday, where he'd proposed elaborate business partnerships over expensive steaks, where he'd been someone people wanted to know. Now reduced to sitting alone while former friends pretended not to see him.
There should have been satisfaction in that.
Sweet, vindictive satisfaction. But I felt nothing except a distant sort of pity. My own life, meanwhile, had taken on a different quality. Lighter somehow, like I'd been walking uphill for years, and only now realized I'd reached level ground. I'd started taking walks in the morning before work, something I'd never had time for when I was managing Marquis' crisis, du jour Danielle, and I would have coffee on her porch, talking about books and politics, and everything except my ex-husband. Tamara visited every weekend, sometimes bringing her new boyfriend, a sweet engineering student who actually listened when people talked. At work, I'd accepted a promotion I'd been putting off for 2 years. Director of Financial Planning. It came with a corner office and a 20% raise and responsibilities I'd been ready for long before I'd finally said yes. Why now? My boss had asked when I accepted. You turned this position down twice before. Because before, I was afraid of what it would cost me at home, I told him honestly. Now I don't have to be afraid anymore. I'd also started sketching out a business plan. Nothing concrete yet, just ideas on yellow legal pads during lunch breaks. A financial consultancy focused on helping women through major life transitions, divorce, widowhood, career changes. Campbell Financial Transitions, maybe. Or something else entirely. The name didn't matter as much as the purpose, helping other women avoid the financial vulnerability I'd almost fallen into. One Saturday afternoon, about 8 weeks after the court hearing, I was at Whole Foods when I saw Marquis in the produce section. He looked terrible. His clothes were wrinkled, he'd lost weight in his face, and there was a defeated slump to his shoulders that made him look a decade older. He was studying apples with the intensity of someone who had to make every dollar count now.
He saw me at the same moment I saw him.
Our eyes met across the organic vegetables, and I watched him make a decision. He started walking toward me. I could have left, could have turned my cart around and gone to a different section. But I didn't. Regina, he said when he reached me, his voice rough. You look good. Really good. Thank you, Marquis. I kept my tone neutral, polite. The way you'd speak to an acquaintance you'd unexpectedly run into. I've been wanting to call you, but he gestured helplessly. I didn't think you'd want to hear from me. You're right, I said simply. I wouldn't have. He flinched like I'd hit him. I know I messed up. I know everything went wrong, Regina. The business, Rebecca, my reputation. Everything I was trying to build just fell apart. Yes, I agreed. It did. He stopped, started again. Do you take any satisfaction in that? Watching me lose everything. I considered the question seriously, looking at this man I'd spent 28 years with, who now stood in front of me as a stranger, wearing a familiar face. No, Marquis, I said finally. I don't take satisfaction in your suffering. But I don't feel responsible for it either. You built a life on lies and betrayal. This is just what happens when foundations like that collapse. I loved you, he said, and his voice cracked. I know you don't believe that now, but I did love you. I got lost somewhere. Forgot what mattered. I believe you, I told him, and I meant it. I believe you loved me the best way you knew how. It just wasn't enough. It wasn't what I deserved. He nodded, tears actually forming in his eyes. I'm sorry, Regina. For all of it. For the restaurant, for Rebecca, for every time I made you feel less than you were. You deserved so much better than what I gave you. Yes, I said softly. I did. I pushed my cart past him then, leaving him standing alone among the organic apples with his tears and his regrets.
It wasn't cruelty.
It was just the truth. And the truth was that I'd already moved on, already started building the life I should have been living all along. Behind me, I heard him whisper, I really am sorry. I didn't turn around.
Didn't need to.
Some apologies come too late to matter. The office space I found was small but perfect, a renovated Victorian house in Grant Park that had been converted into professional suites. Mine was on the second floor, with original hardwood floors, large windows that let in morning light, and just enough room for a desk, 2 comfortable chairs, and a small bookshelf. I signed the lease on a Tuesday morning in September, exactly 5 months after Marquis' announcement at the restaurant. The landlord, an older black woman named Mrs. Okoye, handed me the keys with a knowing smile. Starting something new? She asked. Starting something old, I told her. Something I should have started 28 years ago. She nodded like she understood completely. Better late than never, daughter. Better late than never. I spent the next 2 weeks setting up Campbell Financial Transitions. Not Campbell and Associates. Not Regina Campbell Consulting. I kept my married name deliberately, a reminder that I'd survived it, that I'd taken what was meant to diminish me and transformed it into something powerful. The business cards arrived on a Friday. Simple, elegant, my name, my credentials, and a tagline that Danielle had helped me write. Financial independence for life's transitions. It's perfect, Tamara said when I showed her, turning the card over in her hands like it was precious. Mama, I'm so proud of you. Do you know how proud I am? We were having lunch at a cafe near her new apartment. She'd gotten a position at a financial planning firm in Midtown, was living independently for the first time, was building her own life. Watching her thrive made everything I'd been through feel worthwhile. I couldn't have done this without you, I told her honestly. Your support, your belief that I could start over, it meant everything, baby. You would have done it anyway, Tamara said firmly. You're the strongest person I know. You just needed to remember that yourself. My first client came through a referral from Patricia Chen. Her name was Andrea Walker, 47 years old, recently separated from her husband of 19 years. She sat in one of my comfortable chairs with her purse clutched in her lap like a shield, her eyes red from crying. I don't know anything about our finances, she said, her voice small. James always handled everything. The accounts, the investments, the bills, all of it. And now he's telling me we have nothing, that his business debts ate through our savings. But I don't know if that's true, or if he's lying to avoid paying alimony. I recognized that fear. I'd felt it myself once, that terror of being financially lost in your own life. Let's start from the beginning, I told her, pulling out my legal pad. First thing we'll do is pull your credit report. Then we'll request copies of all joint tax returns for the last 7 years. After that, we'll subpoena bank records if necessary. Your husband may have handled the finances, but they're still your finances too. And we're going to find out exactly where you stand. Over the next 3 hours, I walked Andrea through the process of financial discovery. Not just the technical steps, but the emotional ones too. The fear of finding out how bad things might be, the anger at having been kept in the dark, the determination to take control of her own security. By the time she left, she was sitting straighter, her purse no longer clutched quite so tightly. "I can do this," she said at the door, and she sounded like she was trying to convince herself. "You can absolutely do this," I confirmed. "And I'll be with you every step of the way. You're not alone anymore, Andrea." She hugged me then, sudden and fierce. "Thank you. Thank you for understanding what this feels like." After she left, I sat at my desk for a long moment, looking at the notes I'd taken, the action plan we developed. This was why I'd started this business. Not for revenge, not to prove anything to Marquis. For women like Andrea, like the version of myself I'd been months ago, who needed someone to tell them they were stronger than they knew. The business grew slowly, but steadily. Word of mouth brought me clients, women going through divorces, widows suddenly responsible for estates they'd never managed, young professionals navigating career transitions and wanting to build independent wealth. Each consultation felt like looking in a mirror at different versions of myself. There was Michelle, 62, whose husband had died suddenly, leaving her with life insurance money she was terrified of mismanaging. I helped her create a comprehensive financial plan that would sustain her through retirement while leaving a legacy for her grandchildren. There was Jasmine, 34, climbing the corporate ladder and watching her male colleagues negotiate better salaries while she accepted what she was offered. I coached her through salary negotiations, showed her how to quantify her value, helped her secure a $40,000 raise. There was Patricia, not my attorney, but a different Patricia, 55, who'd put her career on hold to raise 4 children and now wanted to start a bakery. We developed a business plan together, secured small business financing, and 6 months later I attended the grand opening of Sweet Patricia's in Decatur. Each client, each success, filled something in me that had been hollow for so long. My skills weren't just supporting someone else's ambitions anymore. They were changing lives, mine included. One evening in November, I was working late when Danielle showed up with takeout from our favorite Ethiopian restaurant. "You're becoming a workaholic," she scolded, setting the food on my desk. "When's the last time you left this office before 8? "I love it here," I said simply, and it was true. For the first time in my adult life, I'm doing exactly what I'm meant to be doing. No compromises, no waiting for the right time. Just me, building something that matters. Danielle smiled, settling into the client chair with her injera. "You know what the best part is? You're glowing. Not pretend glowing, not making the best of it glowing. Actually glowing. Like you found yourself again." "I think I did," I admitted. Or maybe I found a version of myself I never got to be before. Either way, I like her. We ate in comfortable silence for a while, and then Danielle said, "Have you heard anything about Marquis lately?" "Not really," I said, and realized I hadn't thought about him in weeks. "Is he okay?" "Define okay." Danielle shrugged. "He's working at his cousin's insurance office, apparently. Steady job, nothing glamorous. Living in that apartment in East Point, keeping his head down." I absorbed this information, trying to find some feeling about it, satisfaction, pity, vindication. But there was nothing. Just a distant acknowledgement that his life had continued in parallel to mine, without intersecting. "I hope he finds peace," I said finally, and meant it. "Whatever that looks like for him." "You're a better woman than me," Danielle said, raising her glass of sparkling water and a toast. "I still think he's trash." I laughed, clinking my glass against hers. "He's trash, that's not my problem anymore. And honestly, that's the best feeling of all." Later that night, after Danielle left, I stood at my office window looking out at Grant Park. The trees were losing their leaves, the neighborhood settling into autumn. From here, I could see joggers on the path, families walking dogs, people living their ordinary, beautiful lives. I thought about the woman I'd been at that graduation dinner. The one who'd placed an envelope beside her husband's plate and walked out with her head high. She'd been strong then, operating on adrenaline and careful planning. But the woman I was now, she was strong in a different way. Not defensive strength, not survival strength. Creative strength. Building strength. The kind of strength that didn't need an enemy to push against because it was too busy building something beautiful. I'd spent 28 years supporting someone else's dreams, believing that was what love required. That sacrifice was the same as partnership. That making myself smaller would make someone else bigger. I'd been wrong about all of it. Real love, the kind I deserved, the kind I was building with myself now, didn't require diminishment. It required showing up fully, claiming your space, building your dreams without apologizing for taking up room in the world. My phone buzzed with a text from Tamara. Dinner this weekend? Want you to meet someone special. I smiled, typing back. Can't wait, baby. My place or yours? This was my life now. Office space filled with purpose. A daughter who respected me. Work that mattered. Peace I'd earned through honesty and boundaries and refusing to settle for less than I deserved. Marquis hadn't destroyed me that day at the restaurant. He'd freed me, and I'd taken that freedom and built something remarkable. The final divorce hearing was scheduled for May 14th, exactly 1 year after Tamara's graduation, exactly what would have been our 29th wedding anniversary. I don't know if the court clerk chose that date deliberately, or if the universe just has a sense of irony, but either way, I took it as a sign. Full circle. Complete closure. An ending that honored the beginning by acknowledging how far I'd traveled. I wore cream that day, not white, which would have been too obvious, but a soft cream-colored suit that reminded me of the envelope I'd placed beside Marquis's champagne glass a year ago. Patricia noticed when I met her outside the courthouse. Statement piece, she asked, one eyebrow raised. Something like that, I admitted. Is that too petty? Honey, after what you've been through, you're entitled to a little symbolic fashion. She squeezed my arm. Besides, you look powerful. Own it. The hearing itself was brief, almost anticlimactic. Just a formality, really. The judge reviewing that all terms of the divorce had been satisfied, that assets had been properly transferred, that both parties understood the decree was now final and binding. Marquis sat at the respondent's table with a different attorney this time, a tired-looking woman who clearly knew this was a done deal and was just collecting her fee. He'd lost weight since I'd seen him at Whole Foods. His suit looked expensive but hung on him wrong, like he'd bought it when he was a different size, a different person. When the judge asked if there were any outstanding issues to address, both attorneys said no. When she asked if both parties understood that this divorce would be final and irrevocable once she signed the decree, we both said yes. When she asked if there were any final statements either party wished to make, we both remained silent. Judge Santos, the same judge who'd presided over our first hearing, looked between us with something that might have been approval. I've been doing this for 23 years, she said, her tone softer than I'd ever heard it. And I've learned that the hardest divorces aren't always the ones with the most conflict. Sometimes they're the ones where people finally stop fighting and just let go. This appears to be one of those cases. She signed the decree with a flourish, dated it, and looked up at us one final time. You're both free now, she said simply. I hope you use that freedom wisely. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down, and just like that, 29 years of marriage, or 28 years and 11 months and 2 weeks, to be precise, officially ended. I stood, feeling lighter than I had in years. Patricia gathered her papers, making small talk about her next case, but I wasn't listening. I was too busy feeling the weight of all those years lifting off my shoulders like fog burning away in sunlight. Outside the courtroom, Danielle and Tamara were waiting. My sister hugged me tight, and my daughter kissed my cheek. How do you feel? Tamara asked, studying my face. Free, I said, and the word felt true in a way few words ever had. Completely, absolutely free. We were heading toward the exit when I heard footsteps behind me, heard the voice I'd once loved saying my name. Regina? Please, can we talk? Just for a minute. I stopped, took a breath, and turned around. Marquis stood there in his too big suit, looking older than 54, looking diminished in ways that had nothing to do with weight or clothing. "I'll wait outside," Danielle said, her tone making it clear she didn't approve, but would respect my choice. Tamara looked between us, then followed her aunt, leaving Marquis and me alone in the marble courthouse hallway with our lawyers hovering at a respectful distance. "What is it, Marquis?" I kept my voice neutral, not unkind. He struggled for words, his hands moving restlessly at his sides. "Today would have been our 29th anniversary."
Did you realize that?
"I did notice," I said. "The universe's timing, doesn't it? 29 years, Regina. Almost 3 decades of our lives, and now it's just," he gestured helplessly. "It's just over. Like it never mattered." "It mattered," I corrected gently. "It gave us Tamara. It taught us both things we needed to learn. Just because something ends doesn't mean it never mattered. It just means it ran its course." He was quiet for a moment, staring at the marble floor. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. "I made so many mistakes," he said, his voice breaking. "The affair, the humiliation at the restaurant, all the years I took you for granted. I see it all now, Regina. I see what I threw away." "I'm glad you see it," I said honestly. "I hope that awareness helps you be better in your next chapter." "What if I don't want a next chapter?" His voice rose slightly, desperate now. "What if I want to fix this one? What if could we start over? Could we try again, knowing what we know now?" The question hung in the air between us, and I saw the hope in his face. The genuine belief that maybe, just maybe, I'd say yes. That love could overcome betrayal, that time could erase humiliation, that wanting things to be different could make them so. A year ago, maybe even 6 months ago, part of me might have wavered. Might have remembered the good years along with the bad. Might have convinced myself that forgiveness meant reconciliation. But the woman standing in that courthouse hallway wasn't the same woman who'd been blindsided at her daughter's graduation. She'd built a business, helped dozens of women find their financial footing, learned to sleep soundly in her own space, without jumping at every sound. She discovered what it felt like to make decisions without considering someone else's ego first. She'd found herself again. And she wasn't willing to lose that person for anyone. I smiled at Marquis, a genuine smile. Not cruel, not mocking.
Just honest.
"That door's closed, Marquis," I said softly. "It closed the moment you stood up in that restaurant and chose humiliation over respect. And I've spent the last year learning that closed doors aren't always tragedies. Sometimes they're blessings." "Regina, please." "I wish you well," I continued, speaking over his protest. "I genuinely hope you find peace, find purpose, find someone who makes you happy. But that someone won't be me. Not now, not ever again. We're finished, and I'm okay with that. I hope someday you will be too." I turned to leave, then paused and looked back one more time. "Oh, and Marquis? Happy anniversary. Or rather, happy first day of the rest of our separate lives." I walked away then, my heels clicking on the marble floor with the same measured rhythm they'd had when I'd walked out of that restaurant a year ago. But this time, there was no trembling in my legs, no unshed tears burning behind my eyes. Just calm, complete certainty that I was exactly where I needed to be. Outside, the May sunshine was warm on my face. Danielle and Tamara flanked me on either side, and we walked to the parking garage together. 3 generations of Campbell women who'd learned that sometimes the greatest strength is knowing when to let go. That night, alone in my apartment, the one I'd found 3 months ago, a beautiful space in Virginia Highland with hardwood floors and a balcony overlooking a tree-lined street, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window. I thought about that envelope. The cream-colored one that had started everything, that had contained divorce papers and evidence and proof of betrayal. At the time, some people had seen it as revenge. A calculated move designed to hurt Marquis as much as he'd hurt me. But they'd misunderstood completely. That envelope wasn't revenge. It was release. It was me finally saying, I deserve better. I deserve honesty. I deserve respect. I deserve to build a life on my own terms without waiting for permission or approval or the right timing that never comes. Behind that envelope, behind the divorce and the court hearings and the painful unraveling of nearly 3 decades, I'd found the part of myself I'd forgotten existed. The ambitious young woman who'd wanted to change the world. The capable analyst who could solve any financial puzzle. The mother who'd raised a remarkable daughter. The sister who'd always been loved, even when she forgot to love herself. Steady, capable, and free. That's who I'd been all along. Buried under years of compromise and accommodation and putting everyone else's dreams before my own. Now I was just that person, fully, completely, unapologetically. And it turned out she was more than enough. She'd always been more than enough. My phone buzzed with a text from Tamara. "Proud of you, Mama." "Always." I smiled, typing back. "Proud of us both, baby girl."
We survived.
But that wasn't quite right. We hadn't just survived. We'd transformed. We'd taken pain and turned it into power, betrayal and turned it into boundaries, endings and turned them into new beginnings. Outside my window, the neighborhood was settling into evening. Streetlights flickering on, people coming home from work, the ordinary rhythm of lives being lived. I was part of that rhythm now, part of the world in a way I hadn't been when I was busy managing Marquis' chaos. I raised my wine glass in a silent toast, to myself, to my daughter, to my sister, to every woman who'd ever had to rebuild her life from ruins and discovered she was architect enough to build something beautiful. The divorce was final. The marriage was over. That chapter of my life had closed. And the one opening in front of me, it was mine to write, mine to shape, mine to fill with whatever dreams I'd been postponing for far too long. I took a sip of wine, settled deeper into my chair, and smiled at the possibilities stretching out before me like an open road. The best part of my story was just beginning. And this time, I was the only author it needed. Did you like my story? And what city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. Give us a like if you enjoyed the story. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. By the way, don't forget to subscribe. It encourages me to keep bringing more stories like this. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.